You're nothing, a broke, useless nobody from Ohio, and tonight everyone in this room is going to watch me throw you out like the garbage you are." Ethan Caldwell's voice cut through 400 conversations like a blade. Then he reached into his jacket, grabbed the divorce papers, and hurled them directly at Sophia's face. Not handed. Hurled. Papers exploded across the table. Crystal shattered. A shard sliced across Sophia's bare arm, a thin, bright line of red against pale skin. Ethan never looked at it. He had just humiliated, dismissed, and drawn blood from his own wife. He had absolutely no idea who she really was. If you're watching this right now, before we go any further, please subscribe to our channel, hit the notification bell, and follow this story all the way to the end, because I promise you what happens next will absolutely blow your mind. And drop a comment below telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story has traveled. Now, let's go back to where it all truly began. Sophia Bennett had a rule she followed for 3 years, 2 months and 11 days of marriage. The rule was simple: never be too much. Never be too smart. Never be too confident. Never walk into a room like you owned it, even when every instinct in your body told you that you did. Never correct a wrong number at the dinner table. Never finish someone else's sentence even when you could see the right word hanging there, half-formed, waiting. Never let your laugh get too loud. Never let your opinion get too sharp. Never, under any circumstances, let the man sitting across from you feel like anything less than the most powerful person in the room. Because if you did, if you slipped even once, you would see it. That flicker, that cold little tightening around his eyes. And later that night, the silence would come. The particular silence that Ethan Caldwell had perfected over years, the kind that didn't just fill a room but suffocated it, that pressed against your chest like a stone, that told you without a single word, "You embarrassed me. You made me look small, and you will pay for that." So Sophia didn't slip. She hadn't slipped in 3 years. Until tonight. The annual gala of Caldwell Technologies was held every October at the Grand Meridian Hotel in Manhattan, in a ballroom that cost more per night than most American families earned in a year. Ethan threw this party not to celebrate his company, but to remind the world of his power. Crystal chandeliers. A string quartet that shifted seamlessly into a jazz ensemble at 9 o'clock. Investors from 3 continents. New York's most photographed celebrities arranged like decorative pieces across velvet chairs. And Ethan Caldwell at the center of all of it, radiating the particular confidence of a man who had never once been told no by anyone who mattered. Sophia had spent 4 hours getting ready, not because she wanted to look beautiful. She always looked beautiful, effortlessly, something Ethan resented rather than appreciated, but because she understood that tonight was important to him. The gala was his stage. Her job, as always, was to stand at the correct angle and reflect his light. She had worn the blue gown, deep sapphire, no embellishments, elegant in its simplicity. She had pulled her dark hair back, minimal jewelry. She had deliberately left the diamond earrings Ethan had given her 2 Christmases ago, the ones he always expected her to wear at home, because she'd noticed recently that he flinched when other men complimented them, as if their admiration somehow diminished his ownership. 3 years of that kind of attention to detail. 3 years of reading his moods the way a meteorologist reads weather patterns, not out of love anymore, but out of survival. She had loved him once. She was still almost certain of that. Sophia arrived at the Grand Meridian at 7:45, 15 minutes before Ethan. He had told her to come early and greet people, which meant be there to make me look good when I walk in. She did it without complaint. She shook hands. She smiled. She deflected personal questions with practiced warmth. "Oh, Ethan handles all the business side. I just try to stay out of the way," and watched the relief cross people's faces when she proved herself non-threatening. She had become very good at being non-threatening. James Harlow found her first near the bar where she was nursing a glass of sparkling water. James was Ethan's chief financial officer, a broad-shouldered man with kind eyes and a permanent look of low-grade anxiety. He'd worked at Caldwell Technologies for 6 years. Of the entire company, he was the one person who occasionally looked at Sophia like she was a real human being. "You look wonderful, Sophia," he said, and he meant it. "Thank you, James. How's Karen?" "The new baby." "Exhausting." He laughed softly. "Perfect. Absolutely perfect." He paused, glancing around. "He's Ethan's in a mood tonight. I don't know what's going on, but he's been on edge all week. Just Just wanted to give you a heads up." Sophia nodded slowly. She already knew. She'd known since Tuesday when Ethan had come home at 2 in the morning and sat in the dark kitchen for an hour without saying a single word. She'd watched him from the top of the stairs, and she'd felt for the first time in months a premonition she couldn't shake. Something is about to break. She just hadn't known it would be her. "I appreciate you telling me," she said to James, and smiled and let the moment pass. At 8 o'clock, Ethan Caldwell walked into the Grand Meridian like a man who expected applause, and he got it, the kind of applause made from handshakes and raised glasses, and the particular body language of people who wanted things from him. He worked the room with a precision that Sophia had once found attractive. He was magnetic in crowds. He had the gift of making every person he spoke to feel for 30 seconds like the most important person in the world. Then he moved on, and you realized the warmth had evaporated completely. Sophia watched from across the room. She saw the moment he spotted her, saw the quick assessment, the blue gown, the absence of the expected earrings, the sparkling water instead of champagne, and saw the slight narrowing of his eyes. She lifted her chin fractionally, a reflex she'd been trying to suppress. He crossed the room without hurrying. "You're not drinking," he said by way of greeting. "I didn't feel like champagne tonight. People notice things like that." "Ethan, nobody is watching what I'm drinking." "I notice," he said quietly. And then before she could respond, he was already turning, already lifting his hand to wave at someone across the room, already becoming the public version of himself again. "Stay close tonight. I need you visible." She stayed close. For 2 hours, she stood at the precise distance from him that said, wife without saying partner. She laughed at his jokes a half-beat after everyone else, so it didn't seem rehearsed. She touched his arm exactly twice, once when a photographer was nearby, once when an investor's wife asked how they'd met. She ate nothing from the hors d'oeuvres trays because she'd once made the mistake of talking with something in her hand, and Ethan had given her that look. She was a ghost in a sapphire gown. She had learned to be. And then at 10:15, she saw her, Vivian Cole. Sophia had known about Vivian for 4 months. She'd found out the way wives always find out, not through anything dramatic, but through the accumulation of small things, a receipt, a change in cologne, the particular way Ethan's phone went face down whenever she entered a room. She hadn't confronted him. She'd been processing. She'd been deciding. What she hadn't expected was for Vivian to be here, at the gala, in a red dress, standing 6 feet from Ethan's left elbow, like she belonged there, like she'd been invited. Sophia went very still. She watched Ethan lean toward Vivian and say something that made the woman laugh. Not the polite, restrained laugh of a business contact, but the open, unguarded laugh of a woman who was completely comfortable with the man in front of her. And something in Sophia's chest, something she'd been pressing down for months, made a sound like a door being forced shut against a storm. She set her sparkling water on the tray of a passing server. She walked toward them. She wasn't entirely sure what she'd planned to say. Maybe nothing. Maybe she'd simply stand there and force the moment into existence, make Ethan acknowledge what was happening, make him choose right here in front of everyone. 3 years of shrinking herself had perhaps left her with a single act of stubbornness she couldn't suppress. But Ethan saw her coming, and he made a choice she never anticipated. He stepped forward, not away from Vivian, not toward Sophia, but forward to the center of the room, and he raised his voice. "Can I have everyone's attention?" The quartet stopped. The conversations died. 400 people turned. Ethan Caldwell smiled that stage smile, the one that didn't reach anywhere near his eyes, and reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. "Some of you know that tonight is a very special occasion." He paused for effect. "It's the anniversary of Caldwell Technologies' founding, but it's also technically my wedding anniversary." A warm sound moved through the crowd. People smiled. Sophia stopped walking. She stood 12 feet from her husband and felt the floor shift slightly beneath her heels. 3 years ago, Ethan continued, his voice carrying easily through the ballroom's perfect acoustics. "I made a choice. I thought it was the right one." He pulled the papers from his jacket. "I was wrong." The warm sound in the room died instantly. "Sophia." He looked directly at her now, not at his wife, at a problem he was solving. "I've had these ready for a week. I was going to do this privately, but honestly." He let out a short laugh that wasn't a laugh at all. I think transparency is important for the company, for our investors, for everyone in this room who deserves to know who they're actually dealing with. He threw the papers. They hit the crystal glass, and the sound of it breaking was the loudest thing Sophia had ever heard. Nobody in that room moved. She was almost certain nobody breathed. "You're dead weight," Ethan said, and his voice was flat and calm, the voice of a man reading from a prepared statement. "You always have been. You've contributed nothing to this company, nothing to this family, nothing to this marriage. You're a broke nobody from Ohio who spent 3 years riding on what I built, and I'm done." He gestured toward the service exit, the one on the far wall, partially hidden by a curtain. "There's a car waiting. Sign the papers tonight and we'll keep this simple." Vivienne stood at his shoulder, her expression arranged into something that was almost pity, but not quite. It was the face of a woman who had won, and Sophia Bennett stood in the middle of a 400-person silence with broken crystal at her feet and divorce papers on the table beside her, and she thought about 3 years. 3 years of making herself smaller. 3 years of swallowing opinions and dimming her light and pretending she couldn't read a balance sheet when she could read one better than anyone in this room. 3 years of protecting a man who she now understood had never once deserved protection. She looked at the papers, she looked at Ethan, she looked at Vivienne, and she walked to the table calmly and picked up the papers from where they'd scattered across the white linen. The room waited. James Harlow, somewhere in the back, looked like a man watching a car accident in slow motion. Sophia smoothed the papers flat against the table. She found the pen that had rolled near the centerpiece. She uncapped it. She signed not frantically, not with shaking hands, but with the slow, deliberate signature of someone who understood exactly what they were signing and why. She capped the pen. She set it down. She lifted her eyes to her husband. "Okay," she said. The single word dropped into the silence like a stone into still water. Ethan blinked. He had expected tears, maybe. A scene, pleading, something he could dismiss. "Okay." He repeated it like the word was in a foreign language. "Okay," Sophia said again. "You wanted me to sign. I signed." She set the papers on the edge of the table precisely like she was submitting a document at the end of a meeting. "You're right that I haven't spoken up much in 3 years. I think I'm going to start." "Sophia." "I'm going to make a phone call," she said pleasantly. "Excuse me." She turned. She walked toward the service exit, not because he told her to, but because it was the most direct path to the corridor, and the corridor was where she needed to be for what happened next. She walked without rushing. She did not look back. She pushed through the service door, and the moment it closed behind her, the noise of the ballroom felt like another world. She stood in the narrow service corridor, the hum of industrial kitchen equipment somewhere to her left, the distant sound of a confused murmur building behind the closed door at her back. She took her phone from the small clutch she'd been carrying all evening. She found the contact a number she hadn't dialed in almost 2 years, not because she'd forgotten it, but because she'd been trying to do this alone. She'd been trying to protect Ethan even from this, even from her own family's knowledge of what her life had become. She pressed call. It rang twice. "Sophia!" Her father's voice. Richard Bennett, 71 years old. Wall Street legend. A man who had built Bennett Global Holdings from a single office in 1978 into one of the most powerful financial institutions in the country. A man who, when he used that particular quiet tone, made global market traders nervous. "I've been waiting." She leaned against the corridor wall and closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds. "Dad," she said, "it's time." A brief silence. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, Richard said. She hung up. She stood in the corridor for a moment longer, listening to the muffled chaos beginning on the other side of the door. She could hear voices rising. Ethan's carrying above the others, already working to reclaim the narrative. She thought about the first night she'd met Ethan 7 years ago at a conference in Chicago. He'd been brilliant and burning with ambition, and completely convinced that he was the only person in any room who truly understood the future. She had found it at 24 genuinely exciting. She thought about the day she'd called her father 6 months after they'd started dating and told him she was in love. Richard had been quiet for a long time. Then he'd said, "Sophia, I trust your judgment completely. I just want you to be sure he loves what's actually there, not what he thinks is there." She hadn't understood what he meant then. She understood now. She thought about the loan, the one that had saved Caldwell Technologies from collapse 4 years ago, 18 months before her wedding. The bridge financing that had appeared seemingly from nowhere at exactly the moment Ethan's company had been 3 weeks from defaulting on its debt. Ethan had never known where it truly came from. He'd believed his own charm had convinced a group of private investors. He'd never known that the lead investor, the one whose single call had brought the others to the table, was a quiet voice on a phone that belonged to a woman named Eleanor Bennett, Sophia's mother, acting on a request from her daughter. He'd never known that Sophia had asked her family to save him. He'd never known because Sophia hadn't told him. Because she'd known even then, even that early, that Ethan Caldwell could not handle the knowledge that he owed his survival to someone else. That his pride was the most fragile thing about him, more fragile than his finances, more fragile than his reputation. She'd protected him from knowing, for years, and tonight he had thrown divorce papers at her in front of 400 people. The service door opened, and James Harlow slipped through his face, pale and urgent. "Sophia, what is happening? Is there someone I can call?" "It's being handled, James," she said quietly. "He's in there telling people you've been depressed, that the divorce has been mutual, that—" James stopped himself. His jaw was tight. "It's not right. What he did up there, it was not, I want you to know. I didn't know any of this was coming tonight." "I know." She looked at him steadily. "Go back inside. Stay close to the board members if you can, and James—" She paused. "Pay attention to who leaves with Ethan and who stays." James stared at her. Something in her voice had shifted. Or maybe he was simply hearing for the first time the voice she had never allowed herself to use in Ethan's presence. Clear, precise, authoritative. "Okay," he said slowly. "Okay, yes." He hesitated. "Are you going to be all right?" "Better than all right," Sophia said. "But thank you for asking." He went back in. She stood alone again in the service corridor, and for the first time in 3 years, she didn't feel the need to adjust anything about herself. No reading the room, no calculating the response, no making herself smaller or quieter or less. She was exactly the right size. 18 minutes later, the service door opened again. Not James this time, but a young woman in a hotel blazer who looked mildly terrified. "Ma'am, there's a group of people asking for you at the main entrance. They said the name is Bennett." Sophia nodded. "Please escort them in." "All of them." The young woman's voice had a quality that made Sophia look at her more carefully. "How many are there?" We counted at least 14 vehicles, ma'am." "And there are a lot of people." Sophia almost smiled. "All of them," she confirmed. She straightened the sapphire gown. She tucked the phone back into her clutch. She pushed her shoulders back, not with the performance of someone trying to look confident, but with the simple physical reality of a woman who had remembered who she was. She walked back toward the ballroom. She pushed through the main service door into the room. Ethan was at the far end, surrounded by a small circle of investors, doing what he always did in a crisis, talking. She could see his hands moving, could see the careful, measured gestures of a man constructing a story in real time. Vivian stood slightly behind his left shoulder. The ballroom was quieter than it should have been for a gala with a live jazz ensemble, because 3/4 of the people in it were either watching Ethan or watching their phones. Where Sophia didn't know this yet, but she would shortly. The video had already been posted. Someone had filmed it. Someone had posted it. And in the 45 minutes since Ethan had thrown divorce papers at his wife in front of 400 witnesses, the clip had already been shared 11,000 times. Nobody had told Ethan yet. He saw Sophia walk back in. His expression flickered surprise, then irritation, then the controlled smoothing of both. "I thought I told you," he began, crossing the room toward her. And then the main ballroom doors opened, both of them, together, wide. The sound that moved through the room wasn't a gasp exactly. It was something more collective than that, the sudden inhalation of 400 people, simultaneously realizing that the evening had shifted into a register none of them had anticipated. Richard Bennett walked in first. 71 years old, silver-haired, in a dark suit that cost less than Ethan's, but fit better in every way that mattered. He walked the way men walk when they have spent 50 years entering rooms that rearrange themselves around them, not arrogantly, but inevitably. Behind him came Sophia's brothers, Marcus, 38, the family's chief legal strategist, Daniel, 35, who ran international operations at Bennett Global, and twins Christopher and Andrew, 32, who between them held board seats at 6 Fortune 500 companies. Behind them, lawyers, 4 of them carrying briefcases. Executives. A woman Sophia recognized as the family's head of corporate communications, who was already scanning the room with the professional eye of someone assessing a situation. The jazz ensemble stopped playing. The quartet had already stopped. Richard Bennett crossed the ballroom floor without looking at anyone except his daughter. He stopped in front of Sophia. He looked at her, at the way she was standing, at her eyes, at something in her face that only a father would know how to read. And for a moment, just one moment, the most powerful man in the room looked like nothing more complicated than a man who loved his daughter very much and was very, very angry. "You should have called sooner," he said quietly. "I know," she said. He nodded. He turned. He looked at Ethan Caldwell, and the room, all 400 people in it, the investors and the celebrities and the journalists and the wait staff who had stopped moving, held its breath. Ethan had gone the color of old chalk. "Mr. Caldwell," Richard Bennett said, and his voice was perfectly level. "My name is Richard Bennett. I believe you've met my daughter." Ethan's mouth opened. Nothing came out. "I think," Richard continued with the unhurried patience of a man who had spent 5 decades in rooms where words cost money, "that we have some things to discuss." Behind Ethan, Vivian was looking at her phone, then at Richard, then at Sophia, and for the first time since she'd arrived, the smirk was entirely gone. Marcus Bennett stepped forward and placed a document on the nearest table. He did it quietly, without drama, but everyone nearby could see the letterhead, Bennett Global Holdings, and below it, the unmistakable formatting of a legal filing. "In your own time, Mr. Caldwell," Richard said. "We have all night." Ethan turned to Sophia, and in his eyes, for the first time in 3 years, maybe for the first time ever, there was no calculation, no performance, no construction of narrative. There was just a man realizing with devastating clarity that every assumption he had ever made was wrong. "Who are you?" he said. The question was barely above a whisper, and Sophia Bennett, dead weight he'd called her, broke nobody, useless, looked at her husband of 3 years with the clear, steady eyes of a woman who had finally stopped making herself small. "I'm exactly who I was on the day you married me," she said. "You just never bothered to look." The room was completely, utterly silent, and in that silence, everything began to fall. The silence lasted exactly 4 seconds. Sophia counted them. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then the ballroom erupted, not into noise exactly, but into that particular kind of controlled chaos that happens when wealthy, powerful people realize they are witnessing something that cannot be undone. Phones appeared from jacket pockets and evening bags. Heads bent together. The whisper network of Manhattan's elite activated itself in real time. Richard Bennett had not moved from where he stood. He didn't need to. He had spent 50 years understanding that stillness deployed correctly was more powerful than any entrance. Ethan Caldwell was still staring at Sophia. She could see him processing, could see him running through everything he thought he knew about her, the 3 years, the Ohio background she'd never hidden, but never elaborated on the absence of family at their wedding, that he'd accepted without question, because she'd told him her parents were private people who didn't travel well. The fact that her last name after marriage became Caldwell, and so nobody at the company had ever thought to connect the two. She could see him reaching for an explanation that made sense inside the version of reality he'd constructed and finding nothing. "Sophia." His voice had changed. The performance was gone. What was underneath it was rawer and uglier. "What is this?" "This is my father," she said simply. "Richard Bennett." "Bennett." Ethan repeated the name. His eyes moved to Richard, then back to her, then to Marcus, who was still standing quietly beside the document he'd placed on the table. "Bennett Global." "Yes." The color that had drained from his face came back, but wrong. Too much of it, too fast, flooding up his neck. You're telling me that your family is Bennett Global Holdings. I'm not telling you anything you couldn't have found out on your own, Sophia said. You never asked. That landed. She watched it land, watched something move through his eyes that she recognized after 3 years of studying his expressions. It wasn't guilt. Not yet. Maybe never. It was calculation. The immediate reflexive calculation of a man whose entire self-concept was built on the belief that he was always the smartest person in any room, suddenly confronting evidence that he might not have been. Richard Bennett stepped forward then. Not aggressively, just enough. Mr. Caldwell, he said, I'd like to introduce you to the rest of my family. My son Marcus you've already seen, Daniel Christopher Andrew. Each brother nodded in turn, a small, precise acknowledgement, like the board members they effectively were. And these, Richard continued gesturing to the lawyers, are representatives from Bennett Global's legal division. They've been looking forward to meeting you. Ethan turned to Sophia with an expression she had never seen on him before, raw and stripped and almost frightened. How long, he said. How long did you know? I've always known who I am, Sophia said quietly. The question is, why you never bothered to find out. Marcus Bennett moved, then picking up the document from the table and walking it directly to Ethan. He held it out. Ethan took it reflexively, the way people take things when they are too stunned to decide not to. Bennett Global Holdings. Marcus said, his voice, the measured tone of a man who argued cases in federal court, currently holds 22% of Caldwell Technologies' outstanding shares. That position was established 4 years ago through a series of intermediary investment vehicles. The documentation is all there if you'd like to review it. Ethan looked down at the document, then up, then down again. That's not I would have known. My legal team would have. Your legal team saw private equity vehicles, Marcus said. They didn't see us. That was by design. He paused. We've been watching the company for 4 years, Mr. Caldwell. We've been watching a great many things. The last sentence had a weight to it that Ethan clearly felt. Sophia watched him absorb it, watched the specific fear of a man who has something to hide, hearing the words we've been watching. James Harlow appeared at the edge of the gathering circle. He looked at Sophia, then at Richard Bennett, then at the document in Ethan's hands, and his expression moved through about 6 different emotions, before settling on something that looked like profound relief mixed with profound terror. My God, James said very quietly to no one in particular. Vivian had retreated. Sophia noticed this with a detached clarity. Vivian had taken 3 steps backward and then 3 more, and was now near the far edge of the room, her red dress suddenly seeming very bright and very exposed. The confidence she'd carried all evening had evaporated. She was looking at her phone with the particular focused attention of someone who was making plans. Sophia filed this away. Ethan was talking again. He'd found his footing, or was trying to. She could see him reaching for the version of himself that worked crowds and charmed investors. Richard, Mr. Bennett, I want to be very clear that whatever Sophia has told you about our marriage about tonight, this was a private matter that got out of hand. I think we all said things. My daughter didn't say anything, Richard said. You did, in front of 400 witnesses and at least 1 phone camera that's already generated several thousand shares online. He said it without heat. Just fact. But the marriage isn't what I'm here to discuss. Ethan went still. Richard reached into his jacket, the same motion Ethan had made an hour ago, reaching for those divorce papers, and produced a single folded sheet of paper. He handed it not to Ethan but to his own lawyer, who unfolded it and set it on the table beside the Bennett Global document. 4 years ago, Richard said Caldwell Technologies was 17 days from defaulting on its primary debt obligations. The company would have dissolved. Everything you'd built to that point would have been liquidated. He paused. Do you remember who saved it? Ethan's jaw tightened. A group of private investors. I negotiated that deal myself. It took 1 phone call, Richard said, from my wife Eleanor at the request of our daughter. Sophia asked us to save your company, Ethan. She convinced us that you were worth believing in. His voice didn't rise, didn't dramatize. It was almost gentle. Almost. She never told you because she knew your pride couldn't hold it. The room had gone so quiet that Sophia could hear the ice settling in the glasses at the bar. Ethan turned to look at her, and in that look was something she hadn't seen from him in years. Maybe something she'd never truly seen from him. Not anger, not calculation. Something closer to genuine disorientation. Like a man who has been standing in what he believed was solid ground and has just looked down to find he's been standing on glass all along. He stopped. Started again. You funded my company. My family did, Sophia said, because I asked them to, because I believed in you. The past tense sat between them like a wall. Sophia, don't, she said, not harshly, with the quiet finality of someone closing a chapter. Don't do the thing where you pivot. I know all your pivots, Ethan. I've had 3 years to learn them. Andrew Bennett spoke for the first time. He was the quieter of the twins, the one who chose words the way a surgeon chose instruments. Mr. Caldwell, there's a morality clause in the shareholder agreement that was established when Bennett Global took its position in Caldwell Technologies. It's standard language for our investments. Any conduct by executive leadership that materially damages the company's public reputation triggers a review. Ethan's head snapped toward him. A review. A review, Andrew confirmed. Tonight's events would constitute a triggering incident. The video currently circulating has 400,000 views as of... He checked his phone 11 minutes ago. Someone in the crowd made a sound, not quite a gasp, something involuntary. Ethan looked around the room at the investors who had stopped pretending to have side conversations and were now openly watching at the journalists who were doing the same at his board members, 2 of whom were huddled together near the bar, with expressions that Sophia recognized as men doing rapid math about their own positions. And Sophia watched the moment when Ethan Caldwell truly understood not as an abstract threat, but as a physical reality pressing against him from all sides, that the stage he had built so carefully, the stage on which he had just destroyed her, was collapsing underneath him. His first instinct was to attack. She knew this about him. Cornered, he always attacked. This is a setup, he said. His voice had a new edge, not the flat performance from before, but something jagged underneath it. This whole thing, you planned this. You've been planning this for years. You married me to what exactly, Sophia? To spy on me, to set me up for a takeover. Ethan, no. He was louder now, and the room heard it, and the room watched. I know what this is. Your family wanted Caldwell Technologies. You couldn't buy it outright, so you sent her in, planted her. 3 years of pretending to be some quiet, simple, careful, Richard Bennett said. One word. Quiet. But it stopped Ethan, the way a closed door stops someone running. Richard looked at his daughter. Sophia, do you want to tell him, or should I? Sophia considered for a moment. She thought about what she wanted, not what was strategic, not what would hurt him most, not what would play best for the room. What she actually wanted. I met Ethan at a conference in Chicago, she said, addressing not just Ethan, but the room, because the room was there, and the room deserved the truth. I was 24. I was there representing Bennett Global's Emerging Markets Division. I had a business card that said Senior Investment Analyst, not because my father handed it to me, but because I'd spent 2 years earning it. She paused. I met Ethan and I fell in love with him. Or I thought I did. And when we started getting serious, I made a decision that I have spent 3 years regretting. What decision? Ethan said. His voice had gone quiet again. The attack had collapsed back into something more uncertain. I decided to protect you from the truth of who I was, Sophia said. I decided that if you really knew about my family, about the money, about the connections, you would never be sure that you loved me for me and not for what I came with. So I kept it small. I kept myself small. I let you believe whatever you wanted to believe about Ohio and simplicity and being broke. Her voice stayed even. She'd had months to prepare for this moment, even if she hadn't known exactly when it would come. And then when your company was in trouble and I knew I could help, I helped, quietly, the way I did everything. She stopped. The room waited. I was wrong to do it that way, she said. I know that now. I should have trusted you with the truth from the beginning. But Ethan, you made every choice I made for you. You threw those papers at me tonight. You called me useless in front of 400 people. Her voice didn't break. She'd made sure of that. You made the truth very easy. Ethan stared at her. And then because he was Ethan Caldwell and could not help himself, even now he looked at the room calculating even in this moment what he could salvage. Christopher Bennett, who had been silent until now, pulled out his phone and read aloud without preamble. CEO of Caldwell Technologies publicly humiliates wife at company gala, throws divorce papers at her in front of investors. Video has now passed 1 million views. Trending number 3 nationally. He lowered the phone. That was posted 4 minutes ago. It's accelerating. Ethan's 2 board members near the bar exchanged a look. One of them, a heavyset man named Gerald Pruitt, who Sophia had sat next to at exactly 11 dinners over 3 years, separated himself from his companion and walked toward the group. "Ethan," Gerald said carefully, "I think given the circumstances we need to convene. Tomorrow morning, emergency session. Gerald." "It's not a request," Gerald said, and the gentleness in his voice was worse somehow than harshness would have been. "I'm sorry, Ethan, but this—" He gestured a small, helpless movement that encompassed the room, the lawyers, the documents, the shattered crystal still on the floor, the phone in Christopher's hand. "This is beyond tonight." Ethan looked at Gerald, then at the other board member who had not moved toward the group but was now visibly on a phone call. Then at James Harlow, who met his eyes once and then looked away. Then he looked at Sophia, and for one strange, suspended moment, she saw something she hadn't expected. Not the rage, not the calculation. Something under all of that, something almost human, almost lost the face of a man who has just looked in a mirror and not recognized what's looking back. It lasted 2 seconds. Then it was gone. "You'll regret this," he said. Not loudly, almost to himself. "No," Sophia said, "I really won't." He straightened his jacket. He looked at Vivian across the room, some silent communication passing between them, and then he began moving toward the exit. Not running. Ethan Caldwell never ran, but moving with a kind of contained urgency that fooled nobody. Marcus was already on his phone. "He's moving," he said quietly to someone on the other end. "Yes, have them ready." Richard Bennett watched his son-in-law walk away, and his expression didn't change. He turned back to Sophia. He put one hand on her shoulder, just his hand on her shoulder, and looked at her the way he had when she was 7 years old and had fallen off her bicycle and refused to cry. "Are you all right?" he said. Sophia thought about the question seriously. Her arm still stung where the crystal had caught it. Her chest felt like something had been sitting on it for 3 years and had just in the last hour begun to lift. "I think I will be," she said. Richard nodded. He accepted that answer because he was her father, and he knew the difference between "I'm fine and I will be fine," and he knew which one was true. Daniel Bennett had moved to James Harlow and was speaking to him in a low, quick voice. James was nodding rapidly, his face cycling through expressions. Sophia caught fragments, quarterly reports, internal audits, the name of a specific account she didn't recognize, and filed them away. The room was exhaling now. People were beginning to move again to speak, though nothing like the bright social noise of an hour ago. This was the subdued movement of people reassessing, recalculating, deciding what they had witnessed and what it meant for them. A journalist, Sophia vaguely recognized a woman who covered business and finance for one of the major national papers, worked her way to the edge of the family group. She was smart enough not to push in, but her presence was a statement. "I know this isn't the time," the journalist said to Sophia, "but when you're ready to tell your side, I want you to know that I'm interested in the real story." Sophia looked at her. "What makes you think I have a side?" "Because everyone in this room just watched a man try to erase you," the journalist said simply, "and you didn't erase." Sophia looked at her for another moment. Then she said, "Give me a few days." The journalist nodded and stepped back. Andrew appeared at Sophia's elbow. "The legal team needs about 30 minutes with you tonight if you can manage it. There's a lot to review." He paused. "And Sophia, we found something in the audit, something beyond the shareholder violation." She turned to look at him fully. His face was careful, controlled. But she'd known Andrew her whole life, and she knew what careful and controlled on Andrew's face meant. It meant significant. It meant worse than expected. "Tell me," she said. He glanced around, pulled her a step away from the nearest cluster of guests. "The financial records from the last 18 months, he said quietly. There are transfers, significant ones, through accounts that aren't on any of the official filings. Sophia stared at him. How significant? Millions, Andrew said. And Sophia... He stopped. Started again. The account they're flowing into isn't in Ethan's name. She felt the floor shift. Whose name is it in? Andrew looked at her steadily. Vivian Coles. The name hit her like cold water. Not because she was surprised she had suspected Ethan of many things over the past months, but the scale of it, the specificity of it, the fact that he had been funneling money out of his own company. Money that, partly through Bennett Global's shareholder position, belonged to her family, through the woman he'd brought to stand at his shoulder tonight while he humiliated his wife. Something settled in Sophia's chest. Not anger. Something colder and clearer than anger. Andrew, she said. Who else knows about this? Our forensic team, Marcus, Dad. He paused. The Federal Financial Crimes Unit has a contact number in Marcus's phone. He hasn't called yet. He was waiting to talk to you first. Sophia looked across the room to where Marcus stood watching her. He raised his eyebrows slightly a question. She gave him a small single nod. He picked up his phone. And across Manhattan, in the lobby of the Grand Meridian Hotel, Ethan Caldwell was handing his valet ticket to a parking attendant, completely certain that he was walking away from the worst night of his life, completely unaware that the worst night of his life hadn't started yet. Vivian was texting him from somewhere in the ballroom. He could feel his phone buzzing in his pocket. He ignored it. He needed 5 minutes to think. He needed to get out of this building and into a car and get his mind organized before he made any calls. He was already constructing the narrative Sophia's wealthy family using corporate leverage as a weapon in a divorce, a bitter, estranged wife orchestrating a public ambush. He could work with this. He had worked with worse. His phone kept buzzing. He finally pulled it out. The texts weren't from Vivian. They were from his personal financial manager. 8 of them sent in the last 12 minutes, each one more urgent than the last. He opened the last one first. It read, Ethan, the Bennett legal team has filed an emergency injunction. All Caldwell Technologies accounts have been frozen pending financial review. I need you to call me immediately. Ethan stood in the lobby of the Grand Meridian with 400 of Manhattan's most powerful people 50 feet behind him and everything he'd built suspended over a void. He called the number. It rang twice. A voice answered, not his financial manager. A different voice. Professional, measured. Mr. Caldwell, the voice said. This is Special Agent Daniel Marsh with the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. We've been expecting your call. The valet pulled up with his car. Ethan didn't get in. He stood on the sidewalk outside the Grand Meridian Hotel on a cold October night in Manhattan, holding his phone with everything collapsing around him in real time. And for the first time in his adult life, he had absolutely no idea what to do next. Inside the ballroom, Sophia Bennett accepted a glass of water from a passing server, stood beside her father in the middle of the empire she had never stopped belonging to, and breathed. Just breathed. For the first time in 3 years, 2 months, and 11 days, it felt like enough. The call with Special Agent Daniel Marsh lasted 11 minutes. Ethan knew this because he counted. He stood on that sidewalk outside the Grand Meridian and counted every minute the way a man counts seconds underwater, desperately mechanically, because counting is the only thing that keeps panic from becoming something worse. Marsh was professional, courteous even, which somehow made it worse than if he'd been aggressive. Professional courtesy from a federal agent meant they already had what they needed. It meant the call wasn't a warning. It was a notification. We're not asking you to come in tonight, Mr. Caldwell, Marsh said, but I would strongly recommend you make yourself available in the next 48 hours. And I would strongly recommend you do not attempt to access or transfer any funds from any accounts associated with Caldwell Technologies or its subsidiaries until this review is resolved. I want my lawyer, Ethan said. It was the only thing he could think to say. That is absolutely your right, Marsh said pleasantly. Have a good evening. The call ended. Ethan stood there holding his phone, his car idling 6 feet away, the valet watching him with the carefully neutral expression of someone paid not to have opinions. The October air was cold and sharp, and Ethan could feel it now in a way he hadn't felt anything physical in the last hour. The cold, the sound of traffic, the weight of his own heartbeat. His phone buzzed. Vivian again. He stared at her name on the screen and didn't answer. He got in the car. He drove. He didn't go home. Inside the Grand Meridian, Sophia didn't know about the call yet. She was sitting at a table in a private meeting room off the main corridor. The hotel had offered it without being asked, which told her something about the kind of presence her father's name commanded, with Marcus Andrew and two of the family's lawyers. Her father was in the hallway on his own call. Daniel was somewhere in the ballroom managing the remaining investors who had approached the Bennett Group after Ethan left, sensing with the precise instinct of people who traffic in power that a shift had occurred and they needed to position themselves accordingly. Marcus spread 3 documents across the table. He did it efficiently, without drama, the way he did everything. "Here's what we know and what we can prove as of tonight," he said. "And here's what we suspect and are still building." Sophia looked at the documents. She didn't flinch. She had her father's ability to receive information without letting the receiving of it show on her face, a skill she'd spent 3 years suppressing, along with everything else. The numbers were worse than Andrew had indicated in the ballroom. Not millions. Closer to 14 million transferred across 18 months through a layered structure that was sophisticated enough to indicate either a very good accountant or a very motivated one. The transfers led ultimately to 3 accounts, one in Vivian Cole's name, one in a corporate entity registered in Delaware that traced with some work back to Vivian's brother, and the one that made Sophia go still for a full 4 seconds in an account she didn't recognize at all. "Whose is the 3rd account?" she asked. Marcus and Andrew exchanged the briefest look. "That's what we're still working on," Marcus said. "The forensic team is on it tonight, but Sophia, the structure of it suggests it's been active longer than the others, possibly from before the marriage." Before the marriage. Sophia sat with that for a moment. Before the marriage meant before she'd become Mrs. Caldwell, before she'd quietly shelved her identity to protect a man's pride, before 3 years of making herself small. It meant the plan, whatever it was, might have preceded her entirely. "He was already doing this when I married him," she said. "We don't know that yet," Marcus said carefully. "But it's possible." A pause. "Yes." She nodded. She picked up the next document. She kept reading. At 11:47 p.m., her father came back into the room. He sat down across from her, looked at her face, and said, "Marsh called. They've made contact with Ethan." "How did he take it?" "He didn't run," Richard said. "Not yet. But Marsh thinks he's going to. He has the resources, and he knows the timeline." He leaned forward slightly. "Sophia, we need to talk about Caldwell Technologies. Not tonight, but soon. The company has 1,200 employees. Whatever happens with Ethan, those people need continuity." "I know," she said. "The board is going to be an emergency session tomorrow morning. Gerald Pruitt called me 20 minutes ago. He's asking if Bennett Global is prepared to support interim leadership while the federal review proceeds." "What did you tell him?" Richard looked at his daughter with the particular expression of a man who has been waiting a long time for a specific moment. "I told him I'd have to consult with our family's representative who has the most direct knowledge of the company's operations." Sophia looked at him. "Dad, I've been out of active business for 3 years." "You've been married to Ethan Caldwell for 3 years," Richard said. "You've sat in that office building. You've listened to every conversation he thought you were too simple to understand. You've been to every board dinner and every investor call and every strategy session. You absorbed everything, Sophia, because that's what you do. You always have." He paused. "You know that company better than anyone except possibly James Harlow, and James Harlow is not a Bennett." The room was quiet. "I'm also the woman whose face is on a viral video being called useless by her husband," Sophia said. "You're the woman the entire country is currently furious on behalf of," Andrew said from the corner. He was looking at his phone. "The video is at 6 million views. The top comment has 40,000 likes. It says, and I'm quoting directly, 'The look on her face when she signed those papers is the most powerful thing I've seen all year.'" Sophia looked at her younger brother. 6 million, she said, and climbing, he confirmed. She thought about this. Not the vanity of it, the number, the attention, but the reality of what it meant. 6 million people had watched Ethan humiliate her. 6 million people had an opinion about tonight. And in the morning, Caldwell Technologies would open its trading day under a cloud that Ethan had created himself, and 1,200 people who had nothing to do with any of this would open their computers and wonder if their jobs were safe. "Tell Gerald Pruitt that Bennett Global will support interim leadership," she said, "and tell him I'd like to be in that board meeting tomorrow." Richard didn't say "I told you so." He just nodded once, and the small curve at the corner of his mouth said everything he wasn't going to put into words. At 1:15 in the morning, Sophia's phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. She answered. "Sophia," Ethan's voice. But not the Ethan from the ballroom, not the performance, not the rage. Something stripped of all of it raw at the edges, unfamiliar. "I need you to listen to me." She felt her jaw tighten. "It's after 1 in the morning, Ethan. I know, I need you to hear me out. What happened tonight, I know how it looked, but you don't understand the full picture. There are people, Sophia, there are people who are using you, your family. This whole thing tonight was orchestrated to take my company, and they're using you to do it, and I need you to—" "Ethan." Her voice was quiet, flat. "Stop. Just listen." "No." She said it this way she had never allowed herself to say anything to him in 3 years, without softening it, without worrying about what came after. "I am not going to be the person you talk yourself out of consequences with. Not tonight, not ever again." She paused. "If you have something to say it to the federal agent who called you tonight." Silence on his end. "You knew about that already," he said. "Ethan, get a lawyer." She ended the call. Her hands were steady. She noticed this with something like wonder. Her hands were completely steady. She set the phone face down on the table and sat for a moment in the quiet of the hotel meeting room with her father and her brothers and the documents spread out in front of her. And she thought, this is what it feels like. This is what it feels like when you stop being afraid. She hadn't realized until this moment how afraid she'd been. Not of Ethan specifically, not anymore, but of the shape of her own life, without the structure she'd built around protecting him. 3 years of managing his moods, anticipating his needs, engineering his comfort, had become a kind of architecture. Take it away, and you had to figure out what the building actually was underneath. She was starting to find out. Marcus was watching her. "You okay?" "He called trying to reframe the whole night as a corporate conspiracy," she said. Marcus made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "He's going to try that publicly too, probably within 24 hours. We should get ahead of it." "I know." She picked up her phone again, found the journalist's card, the woman from the ballroom, Patricia Crane from the National Business Review, and set it on the table. "I told her a few days. I think we moved that up." The next morning arrived the way bad mornings always do, too fast, too bright, with the phone already ringing before Sophia had finished her first cup of coffee. She was staying at her family's Manhattan apartment on the Upper East Side, a fact that felt both strange and deeply natural, like a word you've forgotten how to pronounce, but whose meaning you never lost. Her old room, her old books on the shelf. The same view she'd looked at for 18 years before she decided to become someone's wife. The Caldwell Technologies board meeting was at 9 a.m. At 8:15, Andrew appeared in the kitchen doorway with his laptop and said without preamble, "Ethan did an interview." Sophia set down her coffee cup. "When?" "This morning, 6 a.m. The morning show, not the major one, the cable one that runs at 6. He must have reached out to them overnight." Andrew turned the laptop to face her. The clip was 4 minutes long. Ethan was in a hotel room, she could tell from the background, though she didn't know which hotel, in a suit that wasn't the tuxedo from last night, but looked like something grabbed quickly from a bag. He hadn't slept. She could see it in the particular flatness around his eyes. But he was performing still. The control was fraying, but it was there. "My wife and I had been struggling for some time," Ethan said on the screen, his voice carefully modulated. "What happened last night was, I'll admit it wasn't handled well on my part, but I want people to understand the full context. Sophia's family, the Bennett family, has had a financial interest in my company for several years without my full knowledge. And last night's events were, I believe, coordinated to facilitate a hostile corporate action against Caldwell Technologies. He looked directly at the camera. I am not a perfect man, but I am a man being targeted, and I intend to fight it. Sophia watched the whole 4 minutes without speaking. When it ended, Andrew closed the laptop and waited. He said I was struggling, she said. Yes. He's going to say I was unstable, that this is all emotional, that the divorce set me off and I brought my family in to weaponize a corporate position. That's the narrative, Andrew confirmed. Our communications team is already working on a counter, but Sophia, the most powerful counter is you, directly, yourself. She looked at her brother. Then she picked up Patricia Crane's card. She called the number. Patricia answered on the second ring. Ms. Crane, Sophia said, I believe I said a few days. I'd like to move that up to this morning if you're available. A brief pause. I can be at your location in 45 minutes. I'll be at the Caldwell Technologies board meeting at 9. Can you be outside at 10:30? Another pause, shorter this time. I'll be there. The board meeting was 12 people in a glass-walled conference room on the 31st floor of a building that Ethan's name was on his name. On the lobby directory, his photo in the reception area, his vision statement printed on a plaque by the elevator. Walking into it as something other than Ethan Caldwell's wife felt like arriving in a place she'd only ever seen from outside. Gerald Pruitt was already there when she arrived. So were 6 other board members. 2 seats were empty men who had served at Ethan's explicit invitation and had apparently decided overnight that their association was better managed from a distance. Gerald stood when she walked in. He looked like a man who hadn't slept. Sophia, he said, and then seemed to realize that he wasn't sure what came after her name, which told her everything about how the board had been thinking of her for 3 years. Gerald, she said. She sat down. She opened the folder Marcus had prepared for her. Let's start with the financial review findings. Someone at the far end of the table, a board member named Patterson, who Sophia remembered as one of Ethan's golf partners, said, I'm not sure we should be discussing internal financials with... He stopped. With me, Sophia said pleasantly. Patterson's mouth closed. Bennett Global holds 22% of this company, she said. I am a Bennett. I am also, until the divorce is finalized, still Mrs. Caldwell, which gives me standing in any conversation about this company's governance. She looked at him steadily. So, the financial review. Gerald cleared his throat. He opened his own folder, and the meeting began. It lasted 2 hours and 20 minutes. Sophia spoke for perhaps a third of it, which was more than enough. She asked questions that made 3 different board members visibly uncomfortable, not because the questions were aggressive, but because they were precise. They went exactly where she intended them to go, no further, no wider. She had spent 3 years listening to Ethan run meetings from the next room, from across dinner tables, from the passenger seat of cars. She'd listened and said nothing and learned everything. Now she used it. At 10:22, the board voted to suspend Ethan Caldwell's executive authority pending the federal review. 7-2. The 2 dissenters were the golf partners. Gerald Pruitt abstained, which in board politics meant the same thing as yes. At 10:27, Gerald looked at Sophia across the table and said carefully, We need someone to serve as interim CEO, someone with knowledge of the company credibility with our investor base, and frankly, someone who isn't currently under federal investigation. He paused. I'd like to formally propose Sophia Bennett Caldwell for the interim role effective immediately. Patterson's head came up. Gerald, she hasn't worked in... She's a Bennett, Gerald said simply. And the weight of that in this room in this industry settled the argument before it was finished. The vote was 6-2, the same 2. At 10:30, Sophia walked out of the Caldwell Technologies building's main entrance and found Patricia Crane waiting on the sidewalk with a recorder and a photographer she'd brought without being asked. Sophia looked at the photographer. No photos today, she said. Patricia nodded and waved the photographer off. They found a coffee shop a block away, a small one, nothing that would recognize them or make a scene. They sat in a corner booth. Sophia ordered tea. Patricia ordered nothing and set her recorder on the table. Tell me when you're ready, Patricia said. I'm ready, Sophia said, and she told it. Not everything, not the federal investigation, not the forensic details Marcus was still assembling, but the shape of it, the marriage, The choice she'd made to hide herself, the loan that saved his company, the 3 years, the papers thrown at her face and the crystal shard that had drawn blood from her arm. Patricia listened without interrupting. This was Sophia thought a rarer quality than it seemed. When Sophia finished, Patricia sat quietly for a moment. Then she said, "Why did you do it?" "Hide yourself, I mean. You had every resource, every advantage. You could have kept your own identity and still had the marriage." Sophia wrapped both hands around her tea. "Because I loved him," she said. "Or I thought I did. And love, real love, the kind you feel at 24 when you're sure you've found the thing, makes you want to give. It makes you want to protect." She paused. "The problem is that I confused protecting him with disappearing. Those are not the same thing. I know that now." "What would you tell someone in the same situation?" Patricia asked. Sophia thought about the 6 million people who had watched the video, thought about the comments Andrew had read to her, thought about the particular way that story woman, humiliated woman, revealed woman standing, had moved through the world overnight, faster than any story she'd seen in years. "I'd tell them that real love doesn't require you to become less," she said. "If someone needs you to be smaller to feel bigger, that's not love. That's fear wearing love's clothes." She picked up her tea. "And I'd tell them that the moment you stop protecting someone from the truth of who you are, one of two things happens. Either they rise to meet you, or they show you exactly who they always were." Patricia looked at her for a long moment. "Can I use that directly?" "Yes," Sophia said. "That one you can use." The article posted at 4 p.m. By 4:30, it was the most read piece on the National Business Review's website in 18 months. By 5 p.m., Ethan Caldwell's lawyers had issued a statement calling it a coordinated smear campaign and announcing their intention to file suit against the Bennett family for tortious interference in a business relationship. By 5:15, Marcus had forwarded the statement to Sophia with a single line of text, "Let them. We're ready." At 5:20, Sophia's phone rang again. Not Ethan this time. A number she didn't recognize, New York area code. She answered. "Ms. Bennett." A woman's voice, young, slightly nervous. "My name is Kara Reyes. I worked in Ethan Caldwell's executive office. I've been there for 2 years." A pause. "I saw your interview in the review. I need to talk to someone. There are things I know, things I've seen that I think you should be aware of." Sophia went very still. "What kind of things?" she said. Kara Reyes took a breath on the other end of the line. "Mr. Caldwell had devices installed," she said. "In the apartment, in your car, before the gala, before last night he had people monitoring you, your calls, your texts. He knew," another breath. "He knew you'd been talking to someone at Bennett Global. That's why he moved the timeline up. He was going to do the divorce quietly, but when he found out you'd been in contact with your family, he panicked. Last night was Ms. Bennett. Last night wasn't impulse. He planned all of it. He planned to do it publicly so that you'd be too humiliated to fight back." The coffee shop was warm. Sophia felt cold. She thought about the phone calls she'd made over the past 4 weeks, 2 of them to her brother Daniel, 1 to Andrew, 1 to her father. She'd made them carefully, she'd thought, but apparently not carefully enough. She thought about every room in that apartment, every room she'd moved through for 3 years, believing she was alone when she was thinking. "Kara," she said, keeping her voice level with an effort that cost her something she couldn't name. "I need you to not talk to anyone else until you've spoken with my family's legal team. Can you do that?" "Yes," Kara said quickly. "Yes, I just needed someone to know. I didn't know who else to call." "You called the right person," Sophia said. "I'm going to text you a number. Call it tonight. Tell them everything you told me and everything else you haven't said yet." She hung up. She sat in the corner booth of a small coffee shop 1 block from the building that now had her name on its interim leadership roster, and she felt the full weight of what Kara Reyes had just told her settle across her shoulders like something physical. He had been watching her the whole time. The apartment she'd lived in, the car she'd driven, the phone she'd held in her hand in private moments, all of it monitored. All of it fed back to a man who had stood in front of 400 people and called her useless, while privately being terrified enough of her to surveil her like a threat. She thought about what that meant. Not just the legal implications, though those were significant, and her mind went there automatically. She thought about what it meant about Ethan, about who he actually was underneath the performance and the charm and the constructed certainty. She thought about a man so afraid of the truth of who his wife was that he'd built a surveillance apparatus to track her movements rather than simply ask. Afraid. All along, beneath all of it, the king of the room, watching from the shadows, terrified. She picked up her phone. She called Marcus. He had the apartment surveilled, she said when he answered. My car, too. He found out I'd been in contact with you and Daniel. That's why he moved the gala plan up. It wasn't impulse, Marcus. It was a trap. He wanted to humiliate me publicly badly enough that I'd be too broken to respond. A long silence. Then Marcus said in a voice very quiet and very even, Who told you this? Someone from his executive office. I'm sending you her number now. Sophia. Marcus paused. That changes the nature of this significantly. Surveillance of a spouse without consent, that's criminal in New York. Combined with the financial fraud, the federal review. I know, she said. This man was not just toxic, Marcus said. This was calculated, systematic. I know, she said again. She stared at the table in front of her for a moment. The tea had gone cold. Outside, the city moved the way cities move, indifferent and relentless, and full of people who had no idea that in a corner booth, 1 block from a building where a woman had just become interim CEO of a company, her husband had tried to destroy her, inside of something had just shifted permanently. Marcus, she said, call Marsh. Tell him about the surveillance. Already picking up the phone, her brother said. She sat there a little longer. Not thinking about Ethan, not thinking about tomorrow's news cycle, or the board meeting, or the federal investigation. Just sitting, just breathing, just being exactly the size she actually was. Outside evening was coming over Manhattan. The city was lighting up the way it always did, indifferent to individual stories, indifferent to individual pain, bright and relentless and magnificent and utterly unconcerned. Sophia had always loved this city. She'd loved it before Ethan, and she'd loved it quietly during him, and she loved it now on the other side of him. Somewhere across that city, a man who had spent years trying to make her disappear was finding out 1 phone call at a time that she had not disappeared. That she had never disappeared. That she had simply been waiting with a patience that even she hadn't fully understood until tonight for the moment when it was time to stop waiting. That moment had come. And Ethan Caldwell, who had called her useless, who had called her broke, who had thrown papers at her face in front of 400 people and drawn blood from her arm, and not even glanced at the wound, Ethan Caldwell had no idea yet how far she was prepared to go. The surveillance devices were found on a Thursday morning, 6 days after the gala. 3 of them. 1 in the kitchen of the apartment she'd shared with Ethan on the Upper East Side, embedded inside a smoke detector she had touched approximately 1,000 times without ever questioning. 1 in the car, a black company SUV she'd been assigned when they married, because Ethan said it was safer, and she hadn't thought to wonder why safety required a vehicle registered to his company rather than jointly to them both. And the 3rd one, the one that made Marcus go completely silent for 4 full seconds when the security team reported it was in the bedroom, inside the base of a lamp on her nightstand. The lamp she'd bought herself at a market in the West Village 3 months into the marriage because she'd liked the way the light it cast was warm rather than sharp. He had put a listening device inside something she'd chosen for herself. The security team Bennett Globals brought in quietly on Tuesday documented everything with the methodical precision of people who understood that every photograph and every measurement and every chain of custody form was going to matter enormously in rooms Sophia hadn't yet entered. They were professional and efficient and utterly non-reactive, which Sophia appreciated because she was using every available unit of her own self-control to stay non-reactive herself. She stood in the doorway of the bedroom while they worked, and she looked at the lamp on the nightstand, and she thought about every private thing she had thought said or felt in that room, every phone call she'd taken sitting on the edge of that bed, every conversation with her mother she'd kept deliberately short, because she hadn't wanted Ethan to hear how much she missed her family. Every night she'd lain awake in the dark in the warm light of that lamp, trying to figure out when love had become something she had to survive. He had heard all of it. Sophia. Marcus was beside her. He'd been beside her for most of the last 6 days, which she appreciated more than she'd told him. "You don't have to stay in here for this." "I know," she said. She didn't move. "The bedroom device alone is enough for criminal charges under New York penal law," he said quietly. "Combined with the financial fraud, the federal review, and Kara Reyes's testimony, Sophia, this is not a civil matter anymore. This is not a divorce negotiation. This is a criminal case." "I know that too," she said. She turned away from the lamp. She walked back to the living room, where Andrew was on his laptop, and her mother Eleanor was sitting with a cup of tea she'd been holding for 20 minutes without drinking. Eleanor Bennett was 67 years old, silver-haired, with the particular stillness of a woman who had raised 4 children and built a life alongside one of the most powerful men in American finance, and had never once needed anyone to know how strong she was. She looked at her daughter and said nothing. She simply reached out and touched Sophia's hand as she passed. That single touch undid something in Sophia that 6 days of holding herself together had compressed very small and very tight. She stopped walking. She stood in the middle of that living room, her living room, the one Ethan had furnished, with things chosen to impress people he invited over, with almost nothing of herself in it, and felt the full weight of what the last 6 days had been sitting inside her chest. She didn't cry. She wasn't ready to cry yet. But she felt it, the closeness of it, the pressure of all the things she hadn't let herself feel yet, because there had been meetings to attend and documents to review and a company of 1,200 people to hold steady and a narrative to manage and an ex-husband to outmaneuver. Eleanor stood up. She set down the cup of tea. She put both arms around her daughter and held on with the specific strength of a mother who has been waiting 6 days to do exactly this. "I've got you," Eleanor said. That was all. Sophia stood in her mother's arms in a room full of listening device documentation and legal strategy, and felt for the first time in 6 days like a human being rather than a project manager. She allowed herself 45 seconds. Then she straightened up, pressed her lips together, and said, "Okay, what's next?" What was next, as it turned out, was everything at once. Special Agent Marsh called Marcus at 9 a.m. on Thursday, with confirmation that the federal financial crimes case had been formally opened. $14 million in fraudulent transfers, 3 shell accounts, and now added to the file overnight, based on the surveillance evidence, Marcus had submitted federal wiretapping charges. The surveillance of a spouse using electronic devices without consent wasn't just a New York state crime. Because the devices had been purchased across state lines and the data routed through servers in New Jersey, it met the threshold for federal jurisdiction. Ethan Caldwell was now looking at potential federal charges on 2 separate tracks simultaneously. At 10:15, Gerald Pruitt called Sophia directly. His voice had a quality she hadn't heard from him before, something beyond the cautious professionalism of the board meeting, something that sounded, if she was reading it correctly, like genuine shame. "I owe you an apology," he said. Sophia waited. "I've been on that board for 4 years," Gerald said. "I watched how Ethan spoke to you at company events. I watched how I saw things that I told myself were none of my business. A husband and wife. Private matter." He paused. "They were not a private matter. I should have said something. I didn't, and I'm sorry." Sophia considered several responses. She chose the honest one. "Thank you for saying that, Gerald. It matters." "The board is fully behind the interim arrangement," he said. "Whatever you need from us, whatever the company needs, we're there." After she hung up, she sat quietly for a moment with the phone in her hand. Gerald Pruitt had been at 14 of the same dinners she'd attended. He'd watched. He'd seen the edges of what was happening and chosen the path of comfortable non-involvement. His apology was real, she believed that. But his apology also pointed at something larger, the way that what happens inside a marriage is treated as invisible until it can't be anymore. The way that 400 people could watch a man throw papers at his wife's face and call it a private matter. She filed the thought away. She was beginning to understand that the story of her marriage was going to matter beyond her own life in ways she hadn't yet fully mapped. At 11 a.m., she walked into Caldwell Technologies as its interim CEO for the first time. She'd been in this building hundreds of times as Ethan's wife. She knew the security desk staff by name, Michael on mornings, Deshawn on afternoons, a young woman named Priya who worked Fridays and always had a paperback tucked under the counter. She knew the coffee situation on each floor, knew which conference rooms had broken AC and which elevator ran slow. She knew all of this because she'd paid attention to everything for 3 years, while pretending she wasn't paying attention to anything. She walked past Michael at the security desk, and he buzzed her through, and then he said, "Ms. Bennett, it's good to have you here properly." She stopped. She looked at him. "You knew who I was?" Michael smiled a small private smile. "Everybody downstairs knew, ma'am. We just didn't say." She walked to the elevator with that following her, the knowledge that the people at the edges of Ethan's empire had seen her more clearly than he had. James Harlow was waiting at the 32nd floor. He looked like a man who'd had approximately as much sleep as she'd had, which was to say not much, but who had used the sleepless hours productively. He had files. He had a prepared briefing. And he had the particular expression of someone who has been carrying something heavy alone for a long time and has just been told they can finally set it down. "I want to say something before we start," James said. "Go ahead," Sophia said. "I knew something was wrong," he said. "With the accounts. I flagged it internally 8 months ago. Ethan told me I'd misread the structure, that it was a legitimate tax strategy, and when I pushed back, he made it very clear that pushing back wasn't something my position survived." He stopped. "I should have gone further. I should have gone outside. I didn't, and that's going to be on me for a long time." Sophia looked at her husband's CFO, her interim company's CFO now, and thought about the conversation he'd had with her at the gala. The heads up about Ethan's mood, the small, inadequate gesture of a decent man inside a system that had made decency expensive. "James," she said, "tell me everything you know starting from 8 months ago. Don't leave anything out." He told her. It took 3 hours. By the time he finished, Sophia had a clearer picture of Caldwell Technologies' finances than she'd ever had from the outside. The company was not in its fundamentals broken. Ethan had built something real she'd always known, that which was part of what made the betrayal of it so particular. The product division was strong. 2 of the 3 major client contracts were solid. The problem was, specifically and surgically, the money that had been bled out through Vivian Cole's accounts, and the resulting gap in the operating reserve that Ethan had been papering over with creative accounting since at least the previous spring. "If we stabilize the operating reserve," Sophia said, "and renegotiate the terms on the Harrington contract, James, can we hold the company through the federal review period without a public credit event?" James blinked. He'd been CFO for 6 years, and he'd just been asked by the woman Ethan had called useless 2 weeks ago, a question precise enough that it would have fit comfortably in any of the board meetings from which she'd been absent. "Yes," he said slowly, "if Bennett Global is willing to provide a temporary credit facility against its existing position, we can hold, comfortably." "I'll call my father," she said. She called her father. Richard said yes before she'd finished the sentence. At 2 p.m., she held her first all-staff address as interim CEO. Not in the big conference room, not with formal staging. She asked James to send a company-wide message saying she'd be in the main atrium at 2 o'clock if anyone wanted to come down. Optional. No agenda. She stood in the atrium at 2 o'clock, and roughly 400 of Caldwell Technologies' 1,200 employees were there, some standing, some sitting on the stairs, some watching from the mezzanine level above. She could feel the specific anxiety of a workforce that had spent 6 days reading news about their company online and not knowing what to believe. She didn't use notes. "I know this has been an unsettling week," she said, and her voice carried without effort. Another thing 3 years of careful social management had given her without her realizing. "I know a lot of you are worried about your jobs, your projects, your teams. I'm going to tell you what I know and what I don't know." She paused. "What I know is that this company's core business is sound. The product is real. The client relationships are real. What's happened in the last week is about decisions made at a leadership level that did not reflect the work the rest of you have been doing every day." Another pause. "What I don't know yet is exactly how long the federal review will take. I won't pretend otherwise. But what I can tell you is that Bennett Global is fully committed to this company's stability through that process. No one loses their job while we're stabilizing. That's not a hope. That's a commitment." The atrium was quiet. Then someone started clapping. She couldn't see who somewhere in the middle of the crowd, and within 4 seconds it had spread to most of the room. Sophia stood in the atrium of a building with her ex-husband's name on the lobby directory and let the sound wash over her. She didn't let it become more than it was applause support, but not a verdict on anything, not yet. But she let herself feel it. The reality of being in a room full of people who were responding to her, not to a performance of smallness, but to her. This was what she'd given away. For 3 years she'd given this away. She wasn't going to give it away again. At 4:30, Marcus called with news that moved fast and hit hard. Ethan accessed one of the flagged accounts this morning, Marcus said. The third one, the one we hadn't fully traced yet. He moved approximately $2 million in the 2-hour window before the federal freeze was extended to cover it. Sophia went cold. He moved it where? That's what they're working on. But Sophia Marsh says this changes his flight risk assessment significantly. They were operating on a voluntary appearance timeline. That's off the table now. A pause. They're preparing a warrant. When? Marsh thinks 48 hours, maybe less. Sophia thought about Ethan on that sidewalk outside the Grand Meridian holding his phone, staring at his car. She thought about the surveillance devices. She thought about the deliberate, premeditated nature of what he'd constructed, not a man who had made bad choices under pressure, but a man who had been building exits for himself while building a cage for her. Is he still in the city? She asked. As of this morning, Marcus said. His lawyer's office confirmed he had a meeting there at 10. But Marcus stopped. But, Sophia said. His lawyer called Marsh at 4 p.m. to say Ethan canceled the afternoon meeting, said he wasn't feeling well, and his personal cell has been going to voicemail for the last 90 minutes. The silence between them had a specific texture. Marcus, she said carefully, he's running. We don't know that yet. I know him, she said. He's running. She was right. At 6:17 p.m., Special Agent Marsh called Marcus to confirm that Ethan Caldwell had not returned to the hotel where he'd been staying since the gala. His personal belongings were gone. The hotel confirmed checkout had occurred at 2:40 p.m., right around the time Sophia had been standing in the atrium talking to 400 employees. While she was promising his workforce stability, he was packing a bag. An arrest warrant was issued at 7 p.m. The news broke publicly at 7:45, and by 8 p.m., Sophia's phone was ringing with a frequency that made her turn the volume off and hand it to Andrew to manage. She sat on the couch in the Upper East Side apartment, her family's apartment, her safe place, the one with her old books and her old view. And for the first time since the gala, she let herself feel the full emotional reality of what was happening. Not relief, not triumph, something more complicated than either. She had loved this man, or something that she'd believed was love, which at 24 had felt indistinguishable from the real thing. She had loved him enough to hide herself for him to protect him from her own truth, to sit on a park bench one Sunday afternoon 4 years ago and call her father and ask a favor she'd never asked before and never wanted to need to ask. She had loved him enough to fund his survival. And he had spent 3 years listening to her private thoughts through a device in a lamp she'd bought herself at a market in the West Village. There was grief in that, real grief. Not for who Ethan was, she was clear-eyed enough about who he was now, but for who she'd believed he might become. For the story she'd been telling herself about the marriage. For 24-year-old Sophia standing at a conference in Chicago, certain she'd found something real. She let herself feel it for exactly as long as she needed to. Then her mother sat down beside her and said quietly, "You know what I thought when you first told me about him?" "What?" "I thought she's going to outgrow him," Eleanor said. "Not because he wasn't smart or successful, but because you were always going somewhere further than you knew. I thought she'll either bring him with her or she'll have to leave him behind." She paused. "I hoped for the first one. I prepared for the second." Sophia looked at her mother. "You never said anything." "You didn't ask," Eleanor said simply, "and you needed to find out for yourself. That's not a criticism, sweetheart. That's being human." Sophia leaned her head against her mother's shoulder. Eleanor put her arm around her daughter. They sat that way for a while, Two women in a room while the city lit up outside, and the news ran Ethan Caldwell's name in chyrons across the bottom of every financial news screen in America. The next morning brought two things that nobody had anticipated. The first was Vivian Cole. At 8 a.m., Vivian walked into Marcus's law office, not the Bennett Global Legal Division, but Marcus's personal practice in Midtown without an appointment. His assistant called him, clearly flustered. Marcus called Sophia. "She's asking to speak with you directly," Marcus said. "Not me, you." Sophia considered this for a moment. "Is she alone?" "No lawyer with her, if that's what you're asking." "Okay," Sophia said. "I'll come." Vivian was sitting in Marcus's conference room when Sophia arrived, and the difference between this woman and the one in the red dress at the gala was striking enough that Sophia stopped in the doorway for a half-second. The performance was gone. The armor was gone. What was left was a woman in her early 30s who looked like she hadn't slept since the night of the gala and who was holding a manila folder in both hands with the grip of someone holding on to the only solid thing in a room that was flooding. "Thank you for coming," Vivian said. "I almost didn't," Sophia said honestly. She sat down across the table. She didn't try to make it comfortable. "Talk." Vivian looked at the folder, then at Sophia. "I need you to understand that I didn't know," she said. "About you, about who you were. He told me—" She stopped, started again. "He told me the marriage was over, that you'd been unhappy for years, that the divorce was mutual, and it was just a question of timing." She put the folder on the table. "I know how that sounds. I know what I looked like at that gala. I know what I was. But I need you to know I didn't understand the full picture." Sophia looked at the woman across the table and thought about the red dress and the smirk and the specific cruelty of being a woman who helps a man destroy another woman. She thought about whether she believed what Vivian was saying. She did. Partially. The part that was true was probably true. But the part that was convenient was also probably convenient. "What's in the folder?" Sophia said. Vivian slid it across the table. Sophia opened it. She looked at the first page, then the second, then she sat very still. It was a document she hadn't seen before. A legal strategy document dated 8 months earlier, written by a law firm she didn't recognize. It laid out in the cold, specific language of legal planning a strategy for a divorce proceeding in which Ethan Caldwell's wife would be assessed for mental competence, in which her testimony would be characterized as unreliable, in which financial decisions during the marriage would be attributed to emotional instability. He had been planning to have her declared mentally unfit, not as a reaction to anything she'd done. 8 months ago, before the gala, before the surveillance was discovered, before any of it, he had been building a case to erase her. "He showed me this," Vivian said quietly. "Last month. I think he wanted me to understand how clean it was going to be, how completely he was going to handle it." She stopped. "That was when I started to realize who he actually was." Sophia closed the folder. She pressed her hands flat on the table and breathed through 4 seconds. "Why are you bringing this to me?" she said. Her voice was completely level. "Because I have money in those accounts," Vivian said. "And I need you to know that I didn't know it was stolen. He told me it was legitimate investment income, a private arrangement he had with a company partner. I didn't ask enough questions." She met Sophia's eyes. "And because I watched what he did to you at that gala, and I know I was standing there and I have been living with that every day since." Sophia looked at Vivian for a long moment. This was not a person she needed to forgive right now. Forgiveness was a different project for a different time. But this was a person who had information and who had chosen at significant personal risk to bring it to the right place. "I'm going to call my brother," Sophia said. "He's going to come in here and take your statement and that folder, and then you're going to cooperate fully with the federal investigation. Do you understand what that means practically?" "Yes," Vivian said. "It means the money in those accounts is frozen indefinitely pending the investigation. It means you may face scrutiny of your own. It means cooperating is in your interest, but it's also genuinely the right thing to do." Sophia paused. "Can you do that?" "Yes," Vivian said again, quieter this time. "I can." Sophia stood up. She picked up her phone. She called Marcus and said, "Come in, bring a recorder." She looked at Vivian. "One more question. Vivian looked up. "The third account," Sophia said. "The one we couldn't trace. Do you know whose it is?" Vivian's expression shifted, not surprise exactly, but something that confirmed the question had landed exactly where Sophia intended it to. "Yes," Vivian said. That's the reason I came. That account, Sophia, it doesn't belong to anyone connected to the company. It's a private account, set up 6 years ago." She paused. "It belongs to Ethan's father." The room went completely quiet. 6 years ago, before the marriage, before the company nearly collapsed, before the bridge financing, before the conference in Chicago, before any of it, Ethan's father. "He's been running this with his father," Sophia said. "I don't know the full structure," Vivian said, "but yes, I think so." Marcus came through the conference room door at that moment, took one look at Sophia's face, and immediately pulled out his recorder without being asked. Sophia left the room. She stood in the hallway and called Special Agent Marsh directly. "There's a 6th account," she said when he answered, "and there's a second person of interest." A pause on Marsh's end. "I'm listening," she told him. By noon, the federal investigation had formally expanded. By 1 p.m., Sophia was back at Caldwell Technologies in a meeting with the head of the product division about the Q4 client deliverable timeline, asking questions and taking notes with the focus of someone who has decided that the only direction available is forward. At 3 p.m., James Harlow knocked on the door of what had been Ethan's office, the office she was using, the one with his diplomas still on the wall, which she was going to change, and said with an expression that was trying to contain something larger than it was built for, "The Q3 investor call is in 30 minutes. They're asking if you're going to be on it." "Yes," Sophia said. She closed the file she'd been reading. "Prep me." He prepped her in 28 minutes. She got on the call. She spoke for 11 minutes. She answered 7 questions, directly said, "I don't know yet," to 3 of them, and committed to a full transparency briefing within 30 days. When the call ended, one of the investors, a man named Harold Chang, who ran a fund out of San Francisco, and who Sophia had met exactly once at a dinner 18 months ago, where she'd said approximately 40 words all evening, sent a private email to the Bennett Global address that Marcus had set up for her. It read, "Ms. Bennett, I've been on investor calls for 30 years. That was one of the best I've heard in the last 10. Consider me committed." She read it twice, then she forwarded it to her father with no message. He replied in 40 seconds with a single word, "Obviously." She almost laughed. It came out as something that was half laugh and half something else entirely, something that had been waiting for a long time to find a way out. She pressed her hand flat against the desk, Ethan's desk, her desk now for however long she needed it, and felt the solid reality of it under her palm. Wood and weight and permanence. She was here. She was doing this. 3 years ago, she had walked into a marriage and decided to become smaller. She had given away her name, her identity, her voice, her judgment, her family, all of it offered up willingly on the theory that love required sacrifice and that the right sacrifice was herself. She understood now what she hadn't understood then. The sacrifice hadn't been required. It had been requested quietly, persistently, through 1,000 small moments of Ethan's discomfort with her fullness, and she had complied because she'd mistaken his insecurity for her obligation. Real love didn't require that. She knew that now in a way that no longer needed examining. It was simply true the way certain things become true once you've lived through their opposite, fixed and permanent, and hers. Her phone buzzed. Andrew. A text that read, "Warrant executed." Ethan's father turned himself in to federal agents in Greenwich at 2:15 p.m. His lawyer says he's cooperating. She read the text. She set the phone down. Outside the office, she could hear the ordinary sounds of a working afternoon keyboards, a conversation between colleagues in the hallway, someone's phone ringing 2 offices down. The sounds of 1,200 people who came to work every day and did their jobs and trusted that the structure above them was holding. She was the structure now, temporarily, imperfectly, while everything sorted itself out but here present holding. And across that city somewhere, Ethan Caldwell was running, moving money through accounts with his father's name on them, telling himself he could still control the narrative, still outmaneuver the people closing in on him, still believing perhaps that he was the most powerful person in any room. He had never understood, not once through all of it, that the power he thought he had was always borrowed. Borrowed from the woman he'd called useless, sustained by the family he'd never bothered to see, built on a foundation that someone else had laid while he was busy believing he'd built it alone. He was about to find out what happens when the borrowed power runs out. They found Ethan Caldwell on a Tuesday morning, 11 days after the warrant was issued. Not in another country, which was what the federal team had been preparing for. Not in some offshore location with a new identity and the $2 million he'd moved before the freeze. They found him in a motel outside of Trenton, New Jersey, 45 minutes from Manhattan, 45 minutes from the empire he'd spent 20 years building in a room registered under a name that wasn't his paying cash, with 3 burner phones and a laptop, and the specific hunted stillness of a man who had run as far as his own courage would carry him and discovered it hadn't carried him very far at all. Marcus called Sophia at 7:14 a.m. "They have him," he said. Sophia was in the kitchen of the Upper East Side apartment, both hands around a coffee cup, still in the first quiet minutes of a morning before the day assembled itself into demands. She heard the words and felt something move through her that wasn't triumph and wasn't relief and wasn't quite anything she had a clean name for. Something that was simply over. The particular settling of a thing that has been in motion for a very long time, finally going still. "Is he all right?" she said. A pause. Marcus processing the question, she could tell with the specific expression he made when she said something that surprised him. "He's fine," Marcus said. "Physically. He's being transported to the federal building in Manhattan now. His lawyer is already there." "Okay," she said. "Sophia, that's it. Okay. What do you want me to say, Marcus?" Another pause, softer this time. "I don't know. I thought you'd feel more." "I do feel more," she said. "I'm just not going to perform it at 7 in the morning." She set her coffee cup down. "Thank you for calling me first." She hung up. She stood in the kitchen. She looked at the window, the city outside, the early light, the particular quality of a November morning in New York that was cold and bright and indifferent to individual stories in the best possible way. She thought about the motel outside Trenton. 45 minutes. That was how far Ethan Caldwell had gotten on 20 years of ambition and borrowed power and $2 million in stolen money. 45 minutes. A room under a false name. 3 burner phones. She had once believed this man was the most powerful person she knew. The news broke publicly at 9 a.m., and by 9:30 it had generated the kind of media saturation that Sophia had learned to read in the past 3 weeks, the way a sailor reads weather, not with alarm, but with calibration. She knew what was coming, the cycle of footage, the legal commentary, the opinion pieces, the social media reaction that would be loud and fast and then move on to the next thing. She knew her name would be in most of it. She had learned, with some effort and with the help of the family's communications team, to let the cycle move around her rather than trying to manage every piece of it. What she hadn't anticipated was the letter. It arrived at the Caldwell Technologies building, her building for now, at 10 a.m., hand-delivered by a process server. Addressed to Sophia Bennett Caldwell, marked personal. The outside of the envelope was Ethan's handwriting. She recognized it immediately, the particular forward lean of it, the way he pressed too hard with the pen. She sat alone in her office to open it. She had learned in the past 3 weeks to trust her instincts about when she needed privacy and when she needed her family nearby. This was a privacy moment. The letter was 2 pages handwritten on hotel stationery. She read it once quickly to understand the shape of it. Then she read it again slowly. The first page was Ethan trying to explain himself. It moved through several versions of the same argument that she had deceived him, that her family had orchestrated his downfall, that the things he'd done with the money were responses to pressure. She didn't understand that the surveillance was a product of his fear, not his malice. That if she'd been honest from the beginning, none of this would have happened. The logic was circular and self-serving, and she recognized every turn of it from 3 years of living with the mind that had produced it. The second page was different. It started mid-sentence, like he'd stopped between pages and come back changed, or like the first page had exhausted something in him, and what was left was less constructed. He wrote, "I don't know when I stopped being someone worth being. I think it was before you. I think you saw something in me at that conference in Chicago that I had already stopped believing was there. And I think on some level I knew you were wrong about me, and I married you anyway because being loved by someone like you felt like proof that I was someone worth loving. And when I was afraid that proof was going to disappear, I did everything wrong. I know that. I have known it for longer than I've admitted to anyone, including myself. He wrote, I called you useless because I was terrified of how useful you actually were. I called you broke because your wholeness made me feel empty. I called you nobody because I needed you to be nobody, or else I had to accept what I actually was. He wrote, I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't think I've earned the right to ask you for anything. I just needed you to know that I was aware somewhere underneath all of it that you were the best thing that happened to me, and I burned it down because I didn't know what to do with something good. Sophia sat with those 2 pages for a long time. She thought about what it cost him to write that second page. She thought about whether it was real or whether it was a strategy, one last attempt to generate sympathy, to create a narrative that humanized him before the legal proceedings began. She had spent 3 years trying to read this man, and she still wasn't certain. Maybe both things were true. Maybe the second page was genuine and also convenient. People were capable of that kind of complexity, of being simultaneously sincere and self-serving of meaning, something true, while also using it as a tool. She folded the letter. She put it in the drawer of her desk. She sat quietly for a moment. Then she called the one person she'd been meaning to call for 3 weeks and hadn't yet. Dr. Anita Sharma answered on the 3rd ring. She was a therapist, one her mother had known for years, a woman with a practice on the West Side and a reputation in certain circles for working with people who had survived the particular kind of damage that doesn't show up on X-rays. I've been seeing your name in the news, Dr. Sharma said without preamble, which Sophia appreciated. I need to start coming in, Sophia said. I know, Dr. Sharma said. I've had a slot open for you for 2 weeks. Your mother called ahead. Sophia almost laughed. Of course she did. Thursday at 4. Thursday at 4, Sophia confirmed. She hung up and felt the specific relief of someone who has finally admitted they've been carrying something too heavy to carry alone, not weakness. The opposite of weakness, the recognition that certain kinds of weight require help to process, and that asking for that help is an act of self-respect rather than surrender. At 1 p.m., James Harlow knocked on her office door with the expression he'd developed over the past 3 weeks for delivering news that was good but complicated. The Harrington contract, he said. They've extended. Full terms, 18-month renewal. They want continuity on the product team, and they said... He stopped. They said, and I'm quoting the email directly, that the change in leadership has given them more confidence in the company's direction, not less. Sophia looked at him. They said that in writing. In a formal contract renewal email, yes. She nodded slowly. Forward it to the board. She paused. And James put together a retention package proposal for the core product team. If Harrington is staying because of them, they should know we know that. James made a note. He started to leave. He stopped in the doorway. Sophia. He turned back. For what it's worth, and I know it might not be worth much coming from me, given how long I stayed quiet watching you run this company for the last 3 weeks, has been the most professionally clarifying experience of my career. I just wanted to say that. She looked at her CFO, this decent, imperfect, essentially good man who had stayed too quiet too long and knew it, and was living with the knowledge. It's worth something, she said. Thank you. He left. She turned back to the window. The city was doing what the city always did. Moving, building, breaking, rebuilding, indifferent and magnificent. She had made herself smaller than this city once. She had made herself smaller than this office, smaller than this view, smaller than the version of herself that had walked into a conference in Chicago at 24 with a business card that said Senior Investment Analyst and a certainty that the future was large enough for everything she intended to do in it. She was done being smaller. Thursday at 4 p.m., she sat in Dr. Sharma's office for the first time. The therapist was a small woman in her 60s with very direct eyes and the particular patience of someone who has heard a great many versions of the human story and has not been made cynical by any of them. Tell me what brings you in, Dr. Sharma said. Sophia almost said, I think you've seen the news. She caught herself. I was in a marriage for 3 years where I made myself small to protect my husband's ego, she said instead, and I need to understand why I did that so that I never do it again. Dr. Sharma nodded. What's your theory so far? I think I confused love with self-erasure, Sophia said. I think I believed that the most generous thing I could offer someone was the space to be more than me. And I think part of me was afraid if I was fully myself, fully visible, he might choose not to love what was actually there. And was that fear new? Dr. Sharma asked. Or had you felt it before him? Sophia sat with the question. It was a good question, an uncomfortable question, the kind that pointed at something she hadn't quite looked at directly yet. No, she said slowly, it wasn't new. Then that's where we start, Dr. Sharma said simply. They talked for 50 minutes. When Sophia left, she stood on the sidewalk outside the building in the cold November air and felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. The specific lightness of someone who has set down something they didn't realize they'd been carrying since long before the marriage, long before Ethan, long before the gala and the papers and the crystal shard and the lamp with the listening device. She was going to have to do this work. Real work, slow work, the kind that didn't generate press coverage or board votes or investor confidence emails, the kind that happened in a quiet room with a direct-eyed woman and 50 minutes of uncomfortable honesty week after week until the architecture of who she'd been and who she was becoming made sense to her. She was ready for it. 2 weeks later, on a Wednesday morning in late November, Ethan Caldwell appeared in federal court for his arraignment. Sophia did not attend. She had nothing to prove by being there and nothing to gain by watching. She heard about it from Marcus, who was there in a professional capacity, and from Andrew, who watched the live stream and sent her a text that said simply, "He looks small." She thought about that word. Small. The word Ethan had spent 3 years applying to her through 1,000 quiet mechanisms, the dismissive tone, the redirected compliment, the surveillance device, the legal strategy to have her declared incompetent. All of it aimed at making her smaller so he could feel larger. And here at the end of it, he was the one who looked small. She did not feel satisfaction at this, or rather she felt something she might once have called satisfaction, but which was on closer examination something more like clarity. The clarity of watching a story reach its correct conclusion. Not happiness at his suffering, but the quiet recognition that actions and consequences had arrived at the same place at the same time, which didn't always happen, and which when it did felt like a kind of moral order in the universe that she appreciated. She was in the middle of a board call when Marcus texted the bail conditions. She read the text once under the table without reacting. She kept asking her questions. She kept listening to the answers. After the call, she stood at her office window and called her father. "He's out on bail," Richard said before she could speak. "I know," Marcus told me. "Are we comfortable with that?" Sophia said. "Marsh is comfortable with it," Richard said. "His passport's been surrendered. Monitoring device. He's not going anywhere." A pause. "Are you comfortable with it?" She thought about Ethan in a hotel room somewhere monitored, restricted, waiting for a trial that would define the rest of his life. She thought about the man who had thrown papers at her face. She thought about the second page of his letter. She thought about all of it simultaneously. "Yes," she said, "I'm comfortable with it." She meant it. On a Friday in early December, 6 weeks after the gala, something happened that nobody had planned for. Sophia was running late for a morning meeting, actually running late, which was unusual. She was habitually early, and she was moving through the Caldwell Technologies lobby with her phone in one hand and a coffee in the other when a young woman stepped out of the elevator directly into her path. They nearly collided. The young woman, early 20s, clearly an employee with the particular expression of someone who has been debating with themselves for some time and has just decided to stop debating, said, I'm so sorry I wasn't. I wanted to..." She stopped, took a breath. "I just wanted to tell you something." Sophia stopped walking. She looked at the young woman. "Go ahead." "I saw the video of the gala the night it happened." The young woman was gripping the strap of her bag. "And I've been in a relationship for 2 years where the person tells me I'm too much, too loud, too opinionated, too much of everything." She stopped. "And watching you stand there that night and the way you signed those papers and the way you walked out, I called the relationship off the next morning. And I needed you to know that." Sophia looked at this young woman with her gripped bag strap and her brave, terrified eyes and felt something expand in her chest that had nothing to do with corporate strategy or legal proceedings or media cycles. "What's your name?" Sophia said. "Chloe." "Chloe." Sophia held the young woman's gaze. "You made the right call." Chloe's eyes went bright. She nodded quickly once, twice, and then moved away toward the exit before the moment could become more than it was. Sophia watched her go. She stood in the lobby for a moment, coffee in hand, and thought about 6 million views. She thought about 40,000 likes on a comment she'd never read. She thought about what it meant that a woman's worst public moment, the moment a man had designed specifically to destroy her, had become for a great many people something else entirely. A mirror, a permission, a proof that you could be called nothing and still be everything, that you could be thrown away and still stand up. That smallness was not a verdict. She walked to her meeting. She was 4 minutes late. Nobody said anything about it. The weeks that followed had their own rhythm, not the crisis rhythm of the first 3 weeks, which had been relentless and fast and defined by the next call, the next development, the next fire to manage. This was something different. The rhythm of rebuilding, which was slower and more demanding in different ways. It required patience with imperfection, tolerance for the gap between where things were and where they needed to be, and the willingness to sit inside complexity without demanding it resolve faster than it could. Sophia found she was better at this than she'd expected. Or maybe she had always been good at it and had simply been applying it to the wrong project. Dr. Sharma's Thursday sessions were becoming something she looked forward to in the specific way you look forward to things that are hard and necessary and making you more yourself. They had moved past the marriage, past Ethan specifically, into older territory. Sophia had grown up with the understanding that her family's wealth was both a privilege and a pressure, that she was expected to be exceptional, and that being exceptional came with a particular loneliness that nobody talked about. She had walked into that marriage partly carrying the exhaustion of always being the most capable person in a room, and Ethan's certainty, his absolute unquestioning certainty that he was that person, had been at 24 something like a relief. Someone else could carry the flag for a while. She could rest. She understood now that rest and erasure were not the same thing. She understood now that the right person, the right partner, the right relationship would let her be excellent without flinching, would stand in the full brightness of who she was and not need to dim it to feel their own light. She hadn't found that yet. She wasn't looking for it yet, but she knew for the first time in years exactly what it looked like, and she knew she would recognize it. In the second week of December, Ethan called. She had been expecting it. She'd discussed it with Dr. Sharma, actually, whether to take the call, what she wanted from it, what she was willing to offer. She had decided she would take it once, just once, and she would say what she needed to say, not for his benefit, but for her own. He called on a Tuesday evening while she was at the apartment, her shoes off a book open in her lap that she hadn't been reading. "I got your number from the divorce attorney," he said immediately, preemptively, as if explaining himself would protect him. "I know I probably shouldn't have." "Ethan," she said, "say what you called to say." A long pause. She could hear him breathing, gathering himself. "I'm sorry," he said. I know it doesn't fix anything. I know there's nothing I can say that undoes what I did. I needed you to hear me say it." Sophia sat with the words. She tested them against everything she knew, against the gala and the papers and the crystal shard and the lamp and the $14 million and the mental competency strategy and the 3 years. Against the second page of his letter, which she still had in the drawer of her desk, and which she had read a third time on a quiet afternoon when she was trying to understand what she actually felt about all of it. "I hear you," she said. "I meant what I wrote," he said. "In the letter, the second part." "I know," she said. "I believe you." He seemed surprised by that. A short silence. "You do?" "Yes, I think you meant it, and I think it's also true that meaning it doesn't change anything that happened." She paused. "Ethan, you are not a person who didn't know what he was doing. You're smart. You're aware. The surveillance, the legal strategy, the public humiliation, those weren't mistakes. They were choices." She kept her voice even. "You can be sorry and still be accountable for the choices. Both things are true." A long silence on his end. "You're going to be okay," he said finally. It sounded like it cost him something. I know, she said. I don't think I am, he said. Not for a long time. I know that too, she said. Ethan, get help. Real help. Not strategy, not spin. Help. She paused. You wrote in that letter that you don't know when you stopped being someone worth being. I think you need to find out. That's work nobody can do for you. Another silence. Okay, he said. Okay, she said. She ended the call. She sat in the quiet apartment with her unread book in the city outside doing what it always did, and she felt the full, clean completeness of something finished. Not healed healing was the Thursday work, the slow, ongoing work of understanding herself more deeply than she had before. But finished. This particular story, this particular chapter closed. She had loved him. She had hidden herself for him. She had funded him and protected him and listened to him through a device he put in her lamp. She had signed the papers he threw at her face in front of 400 people, and she had made one phone call, and she had watched his empire reveal itself as the borrowed thing it had always been. And now he was sorry, and she believed him, and she was putting the phone down and opening her book, and none of those things contradicted each other. 3 days before Christmas, Sophia stood in the lobby of Bennett Global Holdings, not Caldwell Technologies, but the other building, the one with her family's name on it, the one she'd grown up knowing as the place where her father went every morning with the specific, purposeful energy of a man building something that mattered. She was there for a board meeting, not as interim CEO of someone else's company, as a Bennett, as herself. Her father met her in the elevator. He was in his dark suit, the one that fit better than Ethan's had ever managed, and he looked at her the way he had at the gala when he'd put his hand on her shoulder with the knowledge of a man who had always seen exactly who she was. Ready, he said. Yes, she said. The elevator opened. She walked into the room. 12 people stood when she entered, not out of ceremony, but out of the reflexive acknowledgement of people who recognize someone with authority. She took her seat. She opened her folder. Richard Bennett sat to her left, Marcus to her right. Her mother was not there. Eleanor didn't attend board meetings by choice, but Sophia could feel her presence the way she always had, steady and quiet and certain. The meeting was called to order. Sophia spoke when she had something to say. She listened when others did. She asked 3 questions that changed the direction of 2 separate agenda items, and she did it without apology and without performance and without making herself smaller than the questions required her to be. She was exactly the size she actually was. After the meeting, she stood at the window on the 44th floor of Bennett Global Holdings and looked at the city that had never once cared about her specifically and which she loved for exactly that reason. It asked nothing of her. It offered everything. It moved forward regardless. She thought about Chloe in the lobby with her gripped bag strap and her brave eyes. She thought about the 6 million people and the 40,000 likes, and the journalist who had said the look on your face when you signed those papers is the most powerful thing I've seen all year. She thought about her mother's arm around her shoulders and her father's one-word reply, obviously in doctor, Sharma's direct eyes and James Harlow's belated but genuine decency, and the young woman at the security desk who had said it's good to have you here properly. She thought about 24-year-old Sophia at a conference in Chicago, burning with a future she hadn't yet let herself fully claim. She thought about the lamp. She thought about all the nights she'd lain in the warm light of a thing she'd chosen for herself, thinking private thoughts into a room that was never as private as she'd believed, and she thought even then, in that surveilled room, in that diminished life, she had still been herself. She had still been thinking her own thoughts, reaching her own conclusions quietly, persistently, becoming the person she was standing here now being. He had listened, and he had never understood a single word of it, because he had been listening for threat, for weakness, for leverage, and she had only ever been speaking the language of someone building towards something he couldn't see. He had heard everything. He had understood nothing. And she, Sophia Bennett, senior investment analyst, daughter of Richard and Eleanor, sister of Marcus and Daniel and Christopher and Andrew, interim CEO, and permanent heir and recovered woman and patient in progress and reader of unread books on quiet evenings, she had understood everything all along. She turned from the window. She picked up her bag. She walked toward the elevator with the stride of someone who knows exactly where they are going and has stopped asking permission to go there. The story wasn't over. Stories like hers never fully ended. They evolved, they deepened, they surprised you in years you hadn't planned for. But this chapter was complete. This particular darkness had been walked through and survived, and in surviving transformed into something she would carry not as a wound, but as knowledge. The elevator doors opened. She stepped in. She pressed the button for the lobby. She was going home.